If you had to choose one moment where things started going downhill for Philly, it would probably be this one. You can name many teams that posed a problem for them, but no other team has screwed up the 76ers as much as themselves. After the heartbreaking end of 2019, Philly had to make a choice. In addition to having probably their strongest roster around Joel Embiid, they had to decide whether to keep Tobias Harris or Jimmy Butler.
Tobias Harris over me?
They signed the younger Tobias to a massive 5-year contract of $180 million, which proved to be a huge mistake. Once he inked the contract, he was the 10th highest paid player in the league, which is really crazy when you think about it. Jokic, Lillard, Towns, Devin Booker, and Anthony Davis are just some of the names that made less money than Tobias Harris that year. Not only was he not worth that much, but he's seriously limited on Philly's salary cap for the next 5 years. But why is that? Why is Tobias Harris such a neutral factor on the basketball court? Hello, basketball fans, and welcome to Hoop Vision. Today, we're talking about everything that makes Tobias Harris one of the worst max signings since their appearance in the league. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It takes only a second, costs nothing, and it will give you access to more basketball stories. When you take a closer look at Tobias Harris, he seems like a more than decent player. His regular season stats are pretty respectable, as he averaged around 18 points per game for years on a solid efficiency. Still, his game looks so bland and unnoticeable, like he doesn't have any impact on the actual game. The reason for this is his limited arsenal, which especially shows in the playoffs. There are numerous examples of plays where Harris gets a major mismatch against a smaller player and just doesn't know how to exploit it. When you have a player like Joel Embiid who must get doubled in order not to score 50 on you every night, it gives you plenty of space and options to operate on the court, but Harris just doesn't use it enough. If you compare Tobias Harris to Aaron Gordon, they're physically almost the same size, but they're not the same type of players. Gordon knows how to use his size whenever he's put up against a smaller defender, but Harris avoids these situations. Embiid's natural abilities will force the defense to contract or double him, which gives you two scenarios usually. If help comes from the wing, you have an open shooter, and if it comes from the block, the lane will be open for a cutting man. Guess which one Harris settles for? Being a 6'8 forward with an almost 7-foot wingspan would allow him to pull some really good dunks, but it's like he doesn't even try to be aggressive at the basket. The biggest cause of his on-court problems is his lack of skill on offense. When people say players don't have an offensive bag, Tobias is one of the first guys that comes to mind. To his defense, he's been a pro NBA player for more than a decade, fair enough, but his game looks so predictable, like he never worked on improving any part of it ever. Even when he's posting up against guys smaller than him or similar size, he always settles for a turnaround fadeaway, which we all know is a low percentage shot. Another example of Tobias not using his size is when he penetrates from the perimeter and the smaller defender comes out to help. He could be a few feet from the basket and still pass the ball instead of trying to finish. Many players his size would just go for the dunk or a layup, but Harris either doesn't have the necessary confidence or just doesn't care that much. But it's probably his fear of physical contact keeping him from attacking more. Since he re-signed with Philly in 2019, he never had a season averaging more than 3 free throw attempts, which tells you enough about him not being aggressive. The problem with this is he has averaged around 13 shots per game during his time with the 76ers, around 4 of them being three-pointers. What's the issue? Tobias is not a shooter. Fair enough, his career percentages are decent, but his role was supposed to be much bigger given the fact he was paid big time. It's not like we're taking away the positives from Tobias Harris, but he could have been so much better if he wasn't so timid and settling for jumpers anytime there was an obstacle in front of him. The biggest upside of his game is he's actually good at finishing at the basket, but just doesn't get there often enough. It takes some serious skill to get around NBA defenders with the ball, and Harris just isn't that guy. When you look at the percentages, Harris has a great ratio of hitting 69% of shots near the rim, but they take up less than a quarter of his field goal attempts. His mid-range numbers are also solid, but we all know all of that goes away once the playoffs defense starts in April. The main argument against Tobias isn't that he's a bad player. Far from it. It's just that he wasn't worth the money Philly actually gave him. Other small forwards with such huge contracts have much more to offer on both ends of the court. Another stat that goes against him making superstar money is his off-the-ball efficiency. Harris hits only 38% off catch-and-shoots and 43% on pull-up shots. This would be acceptable if his role was limited to shooting, but small forwards are supposed to be the anchor between the front court and the back court, which Tobias isn't. His lack of movement is infuriating at times, and the idea of him facilitating the team just doesn't hold water. It also must have been frustrating for Embiid, since Harris not moving around meant his defender could lower down to provide help. Given the number of shot attempts he takes per night, you would assume other coaches would think of him as someone to worry about, but it's the opposite. Tobias is easy to scout and break down, which makes him a liability. Your 18 points per night doesn't mean much if teams are wanting you to get them. When you compare facts that Harris shoots 40% from the corner while Tyrese Maxey hits 55%, it's obvious why he's not the guy you'll run plays for while he waits next to the opponent's bench. It's like Tobias is trying to be Ray Allen, except Allen never stopped moving without the ball. Maybe some of his in-game problems could be assigned to just bad coaching. It's difficult to imagine these obvious issues have passed under the staff's radar, but who knows? Maybe that's why Philly hasn't been able to complete the process. After all, they did hire Doc Rivers and passed on Jimmy Butler, which tells you a lot. As a franchise, they've been incredibly patient with Tobias, giving him chance after chance to become what they expected him to be when they signed him in 2019. When Embiid had to sit out for 2 months due to injury, it was like nothing had changed for Harris. He continued playing the same way without stepping up once. Instead, Kelly Oubre was the guy whose numbers and impact went up. It might be rude to say it, but it's like Tobias stopped giving his best after signing a fat contract. He had a comfort zone he played in and never dared to leave it, regardless of the circumstances. He was never a first option on any team he played for, which is why he may have developed a habit of following someone else's lead. But that's not an excuse when your star is absent and you have all the minutes and possessions in the world to make a difference. Even with Embiid injured, he somehow found a way to avoid taking responsibility and remained a third option on a much weaker team. And it's not like people are scorching him just for not being the first scoring option. You have so many players that make up for their offensive weaknesses by playing lockdown defense or helping in other ways. Tobias does none of those. His assist numbers are less than mediocre, and when was the last time you've heard someone say, "Oh yeah, Harris really didn't let that guy breathe on defense"? After receiving $30+ million every year, he just stopped caring anymore. And who could blame him? It's on Philly that gave him that money in the first place, and then for not being able to move him somewhere else. His contract made him almost impossible to trade, since who in their right mind would take on a player with such a salary without getting much in return? It's hard to imagine they didn't throw a party after his 5-year contract expired. When you realize Paul George came to Philly this late in his career, you understand why they couldn't even think of landing a similar type of star since 2019. It's all because of Tobias Harris. Right now, he's on a 2-year, $52 million contract with the Pistons, who desperately need a turning point and some veteran leadership. Tobias might help them with consistency, but the leadership part isn't what they'll get from him, that's for sure. For someone who entered the NBA at the age of 19 and showed big potential, it's sad that he never developed into an elite winger because he had the raw material for it. He just never had that mentality to push himself more, but good for him making some serious money off of it. Tobias's career earnings are estimated at around $250 million, which is an insane amount many more talented players never touch in their life. Being 31 years old, Harris still has some good seasons ahead of him, but it's unlikely he'll ever trick another franchise like he did with Philly. If that wasn't pure robbery, then we don't know what it is. That's it for today, Hoop Fam. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Let us know in the comments, what do you think of Tobias and his NBA career so far? Thank you for watching and growing this channel. Make sure you don't miss out on more NBA stories by hitting that subscribe button. See you in the next one.